Manchester United have won the FA Cup, which begs the question, as many Man United fans are asking, have they had a better season than Arsenal? We've got transfer news, exits, and more. This is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m, bright and early for you guys and girls. Thank you, as always, for tuning in and making this a part of your morning routines. Please do, if you could, be ever so kind to drop a like on the video and help us to reach 1,000 on the show. Every single day we try and do it, and so far that challenge has continued. So thank you to those that continue to help us out. Thank you for those that watched yesterday's show. We got into a little bit of some in-depth and we got a bit into DMC, bit of a deep, meaningful chat yesterday. I enjoyed it, and thank you for your comments. I tried to reply to as many of them as I could during my busy Saturday. But thank you for everybody that did leave your comments and give us your thoughts. It gave us plenty to talk about and plenty to think about as well. But now we're going to bring the conversation background, of course, more so to Arsenal and Manchester United as well. We'll talk about them very shortly. But good morning to those joining us in the chat box. Good morning to Damien and Blackshine, Paul, Amira, Knowledge, Kaiser, Matt G, Stephen, Arasilki, Abby, NSW. We've got Temi, we've got Paul and Darren, Damien, Jose, Luke Shaw, who of course is celebrating his side's FA Cup victory yesterday. And to the rest of you guys and girls, thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Happy Sunday, Andrew. Indeed, and to you, my friends. Right, shall we start? There was another cup victory yesterday that I think is even more impressive than the FA Cup one. Granit Xhaka scored as Bayer Leverkusen won the DFB Pokal. Massive congratulations on Xhaka for winning the double. All it took was that Granit Xhaka goal. Despite Leverkusen going down to 10 men for the entirety of the second half against Kaiserslautern. I mean, Kaiserslautern finished 13th in the Bundesliga table. You got to say bigger props to them as well for getting as far as they did in the German Cup as well. But that brings an end to the domestic seasons, besides that of the Champions League final. Of course, that Champions League final will be taking place next week. We'll see Real Madrid take on Borussia Dortmund on Saturday, the 1st of June at Wembley, with the opportunity to, I hope at least, see Dortmund and Marco Reus lift the trophy. And it's been an amazing season for German and Italian football in particular. And it's always, I think, very important that when these things happen to point them out and to rub it in the faces, if you like, of those that continue to muddy the whole European League scene, and to not talk about players as well and as praisingly as those that play in England. We saw Juventus still come from behind I say behind, they won 1-0, but you know what I mean in terms of where they are currently in the Serie A table. Atalanta winning the Europa League despite losing that Coppa Italia final. And Bayer Leverkusen completing the double. Munich, finishing third behind Stuttgart as well. And I think there's going to be some crazy number of Italian sides in European competitions next season, especially if Fiorentina manage to win the UEFA Conference League as well, which is going to create a lot of drama. But the FA Cup yesterday, which saw Manchester United win 2-1 against a very disappointing Manchester City performance, bringing an end, of course, to that Rodri record. We'll talk about him more in just a second. But what does Manchester United's FA Cup win mean? Well, of course, for the ramifications for teams in the Premier League, it means Manchester United will compete in the Europa League next season. They were previously not going to be playing in anything, but they will be playing in the Europa League next season. Not only that, but Chelsea have been relegated to the UEFA Conference League. And not only that, but they will have to play a two-legged playoff game to actually qualify for the UEFA Conference League in August. So they'll have 2 extra games, Chelsea, in August to play, whoever their new manager is. There are suggestions that Chelsea could deny the request to even join the Conference League because, of course, the ramifications financially for them of being involved in that competition and what's going on currently with their spending. There's lots of discussions surrounding that. And Newcastle United will not have any European football whatsoever, despite all the money that's been spent there, despite all of the clamour for their project. They have regressed this season from last season, falling out of the Champions League, finishing bottom of that Champions League group, finishing outside of the top six, and now out of European competitions entirely. And Arsenal will not play in the Community Shield this summer. I know for some people they will quite like that news. I would have rather have been in it personally. It would have been another trip to Wembley, of course, and an opportunity to win the English Super Cup, as it's sometimes called. For some people, they're quite happy that they're not going to be in it before the season starts against Manchester City. Manchester United will play Manchester City in the Community Shield in the first kind of game, in inverted quotation marks, of the season. And of course, Ten Hag now is in a position where he's in a much stronger position whether or not to stay as Man United's head coach. I think Man United would be pretty silly to let him go. And I'm not saying that with any kind of schadenfreude or irony in my statement. I genuinely think that would be pretty silly with the current market of managers that are around at the moment to let Ten Hag go. He's won 2 trophies in 2 seasons, got to 3 finals as a coach as well. You can't say that he's not doing a relatively decent job in the Cups, but that league, obviously, with the injuries that they've faced, there are plenty of question marks against Man United in that sense. But they have faced significant injury issues, just like Arsenal did. And they, like Arsenal, finished 8th and won the FA Cup, just like Arteta did during his first season. And he's won more trophies than Mikel Arteta has as well, which is something, it's just a fact. Now, that does beg the question, of course, about where we sit on Manchester United's season compared to Arsenal. Now, a lot of obsessive Man United fans are very quick to point out now that they believe they've had a better season than the Gunners. I've put a poll into the chat box to our very unbiased listeners, which says, would you swap Arsenal's season for 8th place and the FA Cup? So far, 88 to make that % of you have said no, you wouldn't swap Arsenal's season for an 8th place finished and the FA Cup. And I agree with this massive majority of Arsenal fans that wouldn't. You know, if you were to look at the 2 seasons as a whole, who have been the better side? Of course, Arsenal have. Manchester United have still come away with a trophy as opposed to Arsenal. If you were to say to a Man United fan in 20 years' time, what would they rather have had? Or maybe an Arsenal fan in 20 years' time, what would they rather have had? Well, it depends, of course, what happens following this season. Are Arsenal more likely to pick up a trophy next season? If you were betting on Arsenal winning either of the Premier League, the Champions League, or any other of those trophies compared to Man United, Arsenal would be overriding favourites. I think we can all agree on that. And that's because of the progress, and that's because of where Arsenal stand right now as a club in the in kind of the context of clubs in England. However, you cannot disrespect the fact that Ten Hag has picked up 2 trophies in those 2 seasons. And if I was looking at that as a Manchester United fan, I'd be thinking and referencing this as a reason for him to continue and to see if he could be more successful, if indeed they're able to keep more players fit throughout the course of the next upcoming season. I did want to point out and return to that Rodri interview for when Manchester City picked up the Premier League title at the end of this season, where he talked about mentality. Well, life comes at Rodri pretty fast, it turns out, and perhaps it was a better mentality that was needed to beat their rivals, who, let's be honest, everybody had down as underwhelming underdogs for this game. That no one gave Manchester United a single hope in yesterday's FA Cup clash, and maybe it was mentality on the day, Rodri, that let you down. It brought an end to his unbeaten record of 74 games. I think that's a positive as well. It takes out that unbeaten feeling of when Rodri is in the side. You can actually beat Manchester United when he starts. So that's also, I think, a bit of a plus for Arsenal as well. There's something, I know that there's this indifference around City and that there's like this emotionless tagline. I know that a lot of people have more Manchester United supporters that they'd rather weren't happy and celebrating this morning. But there is something about Manchester City being humbled that I actually quite like and have enjoyed from yesterday. And I tell you what, I did have a good giggle at Chelsea now being in the Conference League. So I'd like to just thank Manchester United actually just for a second for relegating Chelsea into that competition, because it is certainly something I will revel in. Kieran Tierney's loan at Real Sociedad has now finished, and the player is set to return to Arsenal for talks over his future. Arsenal are holding talks with a number of their players. As we discussed yesterday, Charles Watts reporting Arsenal's talks expected with Emil Smith-Rowe. We know that there are expected to be talks over the futures of Reece Nelson and Eddie Nketiah. And not only those two, but Fabio Vieira. According to The Athletic, Arsenal are considering a sale of the Portuguese player because there's supposedly concerns about his training and how he's performed in training. So this is something still very much up in the air, that the future of Fabio Vieira at this moment in time is not decided and that he could leave this summer. And the reason why he's not been getting as many minutes as maybe many of us thought he might do, even when he's been returning from that injury, is that there's been concerns supposedly of his output in training. So perhaps that provides some clarity, if you will, surrounding his future. Of course, the channel is sponsored by Football Prize. You can win competitions by entering any of them in the link down in the description. Plenty of opportunities to win some football memorabilia as soon as there is an Arsenal-specific prize. You can be sure that I'll be letting you know what that is. There's some European Championship, Road to the Euros prizes, which you can also get involved with as well. Go to the link down in the description. UK only, and best of luck to all of you that do get involved. Right, let's go to part 2 and your questions right after this. Right, part 2, which is the part of the show in which we jump into the chat box and tackle some of your thoughts. I kind of want to hear some of your thoughts around the comparison between Arsenal and Manchester United seasons and where you kind of sit on that. So I'm very keen to hear that. Anasimos says, how you end a season matters. And to be honest, even though I might not swap the season we had for United, I can't just brush away the idea that they had a better season overall because they look back at a trophy. I think it's as I say, that's why I'm asking the question. I don't think it's an easy necessary conversation. I think it depends on where you see kind of Arsenal's future. I personally see Arsenal's future as being very successful. And I think it was important we had the season that we had this year for that future. And I wouldn't be swapping it with Manchester United's season. But you have to respect the fact that Ten Hag's managed to pick up 2 trophies in 2 seasons at that club. I think there is also an irony, by the way, of the Arsenal fans that are being very critical of Arsenal's season now and yet give Arteta absolutely no credit whatsoever for winning an FA Cup. I've said that if he doesn't pick up a major trophy, as they sometimes describe it, then he needs to go, despite the fact that an FA Cup is a major trophy and absolutely deserves the respect, and yet are coming out and saying, well, Manchester United have had a better season. Well, you can't have it both ways. There's some massive hypocrisies going on there. Matthew says, Tom, any preference as to who you want to win the playoff final today? I want Southampton to win. Reason being is no specifics between the two sides. I've got a lot more friends of mine that are Southampton fans. Joe Prince, right at NBC, I'm wishing him all the best and hoping that he will have a successful day. Watching this, he's going to be there at Wembley for that final. So yeah, I'm hoping Southampton come up. Also, it's a much nicer trip if you're going to make it for an away game for Arsenal next season. It is much nicer. Luke says, no comparison, Tom. A season is a journey, not a destination. Nobody should think Arsenal had a worse season, and that is coming from our resident Manchester United fan, Luke, in the chat. I do tend to agree. It's a very Arteta terminology, that. It's a journey, not a destination. George says, I wouldn't swap the seasons right now, but I am rather gutted they have now had the same amount of FA Cups as us, despite of how good we are right now. We need to do better in the cup competitions. Absolutely. And I was having a few debates with people actually in the comment section yesterday. One of the worst, I think it's something we need to add to our Arsenal bingo card. For those of you that are new to the channel, you may be unaware of our Arsenal bingo card. There's a number of classic terms those Arteta outers love to use, like raise your standards and excuses. That's another word that comes up on our Arteta out bingo card. Another one is that Arteta doesn't care about the cups. That is the most ludicrous claim ever. Arsenal absolutely, and Arteta in particular, does care about the cups. Do we rotate in those cup competitions? Yes, of course we do, because we need to. And now that we're going to go into next season with the depth that is hopefully going to be improved by our transfer business, we will be looking to be expecting to do better in those cup competitions. And Arsenal, of course, in the FA Cup in the last 2 seasons have been knocked out by Liverpool and Manchester City. So when it comes down to not necessarily caring about the FA Cup, it's just an argument that falls on deaf ears because it doesn't really work. The League Cup's been disappointing. We've been knocked out by West Ham. We've been knocked out by Brighton in the last couple of seasons, and you'd hope that we'd be better than that. But at the same time, we've rotated in those games, and those teams necessarily haven't. At the same kind of, West Ham played a very full strength side against Arsenal in that League Cup game, and we rotated rather heavily. But the whole idea that Arteta doesn't care about the cups is just stupid. Like, it's the most ridiculous claim. If you hear him talk about the cup competitions, he clearly does. So any accusations or claims that he doesn't care about the cups is the most absent-minded and ridiculous viewpoint that cannot be justified, by the way. It just cannot be justified in any way, shape, or form. And I encourage anyone that would like to try and come on the show to justify that. You are more than welcome to, although I very doubt that you would. Paul says, now Arsenal are not in the Community Shield. Do you think the Emirates Cup will go back to being 2 days? Potentially. It could be a 2-day thing. It could still be a 1-day thing with extra teams. We'll have to wait and see. But there is an opportunity that the Emirates Cup will be extended as a result of us not being in the Community Shield as well. Joash says, Arsenal's season is not a failure, but rather a success, given that this is still being a process. John says it's rubbish. Of course we care about the Cups. Chris says, I really hope that we get some favourable fixtures in the Cups next season. A third round FA Cup game at a League Two club would be nice. I mean, no one can take away Manchester United's FA Cup win. They've beaten Liverpool and they've beaten Manchester City on the way to their FA Cup win. They very nearly got knocked out by Coventry, of course. Very, very. It's amazing how football can be, isn't it? You nearly get knocked out by Coventry City in the FA Cup semi-final, and then you beat Manchester City in the final. It's amazing what this sport can throw up, but you can't take it away. They still beat City and Liverpool on the way to winning that trophy, as Arsenal beat Chelsea and City, of course, on the way to picking up their trophy. Anna Simo says it's frustrating more than anything. United are in the dumps and they still managed 3 finals with 2 trophies in 2 years, and lucky in parts, sure, but how do we manage to come up short time and time again? Again, I think there's obviously been reasons for that in the cup competitions in particular, being knocked out by City, being knocked out by Liverpool. We were unlucky, I thought, against Liverpool. City were by far the better team when we were knocked out by them 1-0 in the Etihad a couple of seasons ago. But I thought we were very unlucky to be knocked out by Liverpool in this year's FA Cup. I thought we were the better side, and they scored late on and was a bit of a smash and grab, if you will. But our depth, our issues of injuries, of course, have cost us at certain times throughout the campaign. And sadly, our finishing at points has also let us down. But to suggest that we didn't care about them is madness. Chunho says, no way that we would be swapping for Manchester United season. As well as Man U have done well to win the FA Cup, they will continue to struggle with their likely new manager in a season of transition. I'm not sure they will sack him. But equally, I'm not sure that he'll stay. I'm kind of 50-50, I think, on this one. Rob says, I'd rather have the FA Cup, but I'd imagine the Arteta up brigade, if we dropped to 8th and played the way Man United had, they'd also tend to be the ones saying trophies are the whole point, and heads would implode. There would certainly be lots of... I mean, you know how it goes. You could absolutely foresee kind of the Arsenal critics, the Arteta critics, if Arsenal had the season Manchester United had and picked up a trophy and finished 8th. If we'd have gone from last season to 8th in the FA Cup, I don't think that's justifiable. I don't think it would be. I don't think I could sit there at the end of the season if Arsenal had finished 2nd last year. If we'd have gone from 2nd last season to 8th in an FA Cup, I don't think I could justify Arteta. I don't think I could justify him staying. I don't think I could. I'm not sure that would be justifiable enough. And I consider the FA Cup a major trophy. But that in itself, I think, raises a really interesting question. If Arsenal had dropped from 2nd to 8th this season, I know Man United didn't, by the way. This isn't saying that's what Man United did. But if Arsenal had dropped from... Well, I mean, did Man United finish in the top 4 last season? Am I going mad? I feel like they were in the Champions League this season, weren't they? Premier League table. Let me have a quick look. What was last season? 22-23. Man United finished 3rd last season and they dropped to 8th in the table. Yes, they've won the FA Cup. I guess that changes things quite a lot for... I mean, I'd be interested what Luke thinks about this, actually. From dropping from 3rd in the league to 8th is a huge drop. Yes, you picked up the FA Cup. Yes, you got to a League Cup final as well. Was it a League Cup final? Was it League? No, it was Chelsea, wasn't it? What was the other final they got to? They got to another final. I can't remember. It was the FA Cup last season, wasn't it, when they lost to Manchester City? But to go from 3rd to 8th, massive drop. From an Arsenal perspective, if we'd have gone from 2nd last season to 8th this season, could you justify Arteta staying? You get Europa League, of course, by winning the FA Cup. I think I'd find it very hard. Of course, he's got 1 year left on his contract, Arteta. So we would not be in a position where we would have to necessarily renew if that would have happened. I don't know if I could. I don't know if I would have been able to justify that because that's an incredible regression. And considering we would have spent the money that we spent as well, Rice coming in, Havertz coming in, who probably wouldn't have been as good if we were finishing 8th, there would have been big question marks about what we would have done. So, yeah, I think that probably tells you the season, doesn't that? Tells you the differences. Luke says it means that Man United have degraded as a Premier League team. Cup form is different. Yeah, Man United have turned into a bit of a cup side, getting to those finals, of course. And that's why I think that the league stands with a greater amount of importance. People will say, well, in 20 years' time, will we remember the season Arsenal finished second more than the season that Man United beat Man City in the final of the FA Cup? No, you're probably right. We probably won't. Unless, of course, it leads to something. Unless it leads somewhere. It leads to Arsenal picking up a Premier League trophy. It leads to Arsenal picking up a Champions League trophy. That's the difference. And that's the element of being unknown that we don't have right now, is we don't know ultimately what this is leading to for Arsenal yet. We have a lot of optimism and hope and promise that it's going to lead to something quite significant, but we don't know that. But I will leave. Yes, Darren says we'll do another poll. I think we will. We've got plenty of time left in today's show. I'm going to have 10 minutes to answer more of your questions. Just to give you an update on the current poll, of 400 people plus that have voted on this, 85% of you have said that you would not have swapped Arsenal's season for 8th place and an FA Cup. We'll end that poll there and we'll start a new poll. And that new poll question is if Arsenal had gone from 2nd to 8th, but picked up the FA Cup, could you justify keeping Arteta on? So the answer is yes, you could justify keeping him on after the season, or no, you couldn't justify keeping Arteta on from going to 2nd to 8th. So, yeah, do let me know what you think in the chat box. And that's why I think the difference in the two seasons, I think that's the biggest indicator of why there's a difference between Man United's finishing 8th in a trophy and Arteta finishing 2nd with no trophy. Because if Arsenal had finished 8th and won a trophy, there's no way you could justify getting... I don't think... For me, there's no way of justifying Arteta staying on from going 2nd to 8th. But going from where we were last season, pushing City until the final day and finishing 2 points behind them, breaking loads of records in terms of wins and goal scoring, conceding less goals than we did last year, it's very, very easy to justify. In fact, I don't think there's even an argument to sack Arteta that stands up this season. So I think that's probably I think we probably worked it out. That's the biggest difference between Arsenal and Manchester United's season. Trevor says, I thought it was disrespectful with the media going on about Ten Hag losing his job on a big day. Yeah, I saw his interview with Alan Shearer and Gary Lineker. I like Gary Lineker a lot. I'm indifferent about Alan Shearer sometimes and his views. But I agreed with Ten Hag when he was saying that the English media, and as someone who's in the English media, I have to come across people within that and say these things. So I'm more than happy to say this. But we do build up players and we hammer them. The English media is synonymous with that view of building players. I think Arteta talked about it as well in the Amazon documentary. I remember there being a scene where he was talking to one of the Arsenal coaches saying that the media build up these players and then just smash them down. I remember that scene in the Arsenal Amazon documentary. So, yeah, it's certainly something that the clubs share and those managers share about the view of things as well. JD says, if Arteta had finished 8th this season and won the FA Cup after the finishing 2nd last season, I'd sack him straight away, and that's how much I rate the FA Cup. Now, I don't want this to turn into an FA Cup bashing. That's not what this is about. The FA Cup is, in my opinion, a major trophy. But I think also it provides the context of how we view these things, and how we view the cup competitions and their value. I think that the FA Cup should not be disrespected as a competition. The League Cup, I'm very indifferent about. I think the League Cup has been denigrated as a competition after years and years and years of just being this two-legged semi-final that wins you a UEFA Conference League place. I don't think that the League Cup has anywhere near the level of weight that the FA Cup does. The FA Cup is a major trophy and should be respected. But at the same time, for Arsenal to go from 2nd to finishing 8th, would just be something unjustifiable, I think. Jeffrey says, I think it's a bit funny. Man U had to spend almost $500 million to win the FA Cup, but Arteta won it in his first season with only being there 6 months, yet he's the one that's received criticism, indeed. John says, context for the poll is required. If you can see the team lost really key players for long periods, But when they came back, you could see the style and play, and then that returns a bit of a difference. I see where you're coming from, John, but I think that even with the injuries, say if they've been as significant as Manchester United had, I still don't think you could justify an 8th place finish, mate. I really don't. I don't think that's still justifiable. To finish behind Spurs, to finish behind this Chelsea side, to finish behind Newcastle, who have regressed as well, to finish behind Aston Villa, who would have obviously overtaken Arsenal in that season, finished 4th. I still don't think, Chelsea had huge injury issues throughout the entirety of their season, finished 6th still. So I don't think it's in any way possible to have justified it, even with injuries. There are Arsenal finishing second in the league, not this season, just gone, the season before, with the injuries that we had, justifies us not getting it over the line. And this season, of course, finishing 2 points off Manchester City, having lost our £38 million signing for the entirety of the campaign and our second best midfielder for the 2/3 of the season as well, definitely plays it a part in it. But you wouldn't be able to justify 8th place with those level of injuries and more from second last season. Paul says, though, it depends on the circumstances. Well, if we had 10 players injured for most of the season, then no. I don't buy into the injury issue for that level of regression. I don't think you can justify that level of regression, even with injuries. So for me, it's still a no. The poll at the moment, over 150 of you have voted. 75% say no. You couldn't justify keeping Arteta on if he'd have had the season that Manchester United have had this year. Sophie says, Man United won silverware. Nobody remembers second place. We may have had a better season in the league, but they have had more success. And I think if you're talking about trophies, of course they've had more success. But Soph, I'm interested to ask you this question that we've been talking about this morning. If Arteta had finished 8th and won the FA Cup, do you think you could justify sacking him more compared to if he'd have finished the season this season? Do you think there'd be more justification to sack Arteta if we'd have had the same season that Man United have had than the season that we've had now? Because I think there'd be far more justification to sack Arteta for having a season that Man United have had than there is the season that he has currently had. And so I think, therefore, that provides a lot of context to that argument of who has had the better season. AFC Till I Die says £41 went to Arsenal. Sorry, £41. 40,990,000 went to Arsenal for their Champions League run compared to Man United winning the FA Cup, taking home a whole 3.9 million. I'm sorry, but I think we had a better season. I'm not sure it's necessarily measured by how much prize money you win, but I take the point. Trevor says, if sacking a manager for finishing second means no manager is safe in the league, and some would certainly say that. John says, so by your logic, Tom, we can only keep Arteta if we finished first. No, that's not my logic at all, John. Arsenal need to progress. That's what I need to see. For Arteta to stay, Arsenal need to be moving forwards. Arsenal need to continue to move forwards. If we were to compete for the title next season and pick up a trophy, again, we've progressed. But if we regress, if we are worse, if we finished outside the top 4, if we don't pick up any trophy and do that, there's very little to be able to justify that. So no, John, I don't think you quite got my logic there. Soph says, does he have the same squad? Either way, sacking a manager when he's won something isn't justifiable. There's a lot of people that still would have sacked Arteta after that FA Cup fun, even after 6 months, Soph, which is crazy, but they existed. But I'm curious as to your answer, Soph. What can you justify more? I just want to know what you can justify more. Could you justify sacking Arteta for finishing second with no trophy more than you could justify sacking Arteta for finishing 8th with an FA Cup? You tell me. I'd love to know the answer. Just a simple one or the other. This is all I need. Matthew says, sorry, I disagree. After 25 years of teams throughout the Premier League and even the Championship fielding heavily rotated sides, the FA Cup lost its luster. If they don't care, then why should I? I mean, who are you saying if they don't care? Because if you're saying it's Arsenal that don't care, then I'm sorry, but it's wrong. It's not about rotating sides in the cup competitions is not an indication that you don't care. Rotating sides in the cup competitions is a result of the number of games that clubs are expected to play throughout the course of a Premier League season. That is as simple as that. So there is no justification for saying that the clubs don't care if they rotate in the FA Cup, because they have to rotate in the cup competitions, because the number of games that these players are expected to play means that we absolutely have to. Soph said that she would have rather finished 8th and won the FA Cup if we weren't going to win the league. So I assume that, Soph, you would have said that you would have rather have Manchester United's season than Arsenal's. I disagree personally. I couldn't do that. I think I would have sacked Arteta if he'd have had the season that Man United have had compared to the season that we've had now, is where I sit. So we differ on that regard. Paul says you do some things, have a poor season between good ones. You keep going and you learn as you go as well, of course. And I think Arsenal have obviously learned a lot as they have only moved in one direction. If they had finished 8th, they wouldn't have that tack. We wouldn't be able to say that Arsenal are only moving in a positive direction, because we wouldn't have moved in a positive direction. We would have been in a dramatically worse direction if we'd have finished 8th. Maximus says, no, Tom, because that means we have moved backwards. The FA Cup indicates you were good on a day, but throughout the season, there has to be improvement. And 8th position means that you have moved backwards. I don't know. It's interesting you say no, Tom, because I actually think that I agree with you, Maximus, entirely. I think you're absolutely right. I think an FA Cup indicates you were good on several days, of course, on several matches over the course of that season in those knockout games. But throughout the season, you have to, as you say, show improvement. And 8th place means that they have moved backwards. So, I wouldn't say no, Tom, because I agree with you, Maximus. Harbury says, but we ended up with nothing and niceness. Oh, we didn't end up with nothing, Sophie. Because it's my absolute belief that this season is as Luke Shaw, our resident Manchester United fan, was saying, who agrees that Arsenal have still had a better season than them. It's because you can see that Arsenal are far better placed to be picking up these trophies in the near future. Man United, if you were to look at next season, if asking you honestly, Sophie, who is more likely to win the Premier League next season, Arsenal or Manchester United? I think that there wouldn't be a single person that would say Manchester United that wasn't joking, and that's where we're at. That's why this season for Arsenal is more important than Manchester United, because there's no way in hell that Man United are going to get close to a Premier League title next season. Whereas next season, the chances of Arsenal winning a Premier League title because of the season that they've just had is far and away more likely. Far, far and away more likely. Alvamod says, people who say that we ended up with nothing, I don't agree with. Our season was amazing. I wouldn't change it for any other team. I'd change it for Man City's, Alvamod. I'd change it for theirs, to be honest. I'd rather have won it. But I take your point. I know what you're going. The other 18 sides in the league. I see where you're coming from. John says, we can all agree Arteta has transformed our team. If we finish 3rd next season but do mount a challenge, however, but lose and we pick up the FA Cup, I'd still have Arteta. I think he's one of the best managers around. Aaron says, it's the league or nothing then. 4 years, no trophy. It'll be interesting if we go a 5th. It will be interesting next season to see if Arsenal win nothing, what happens. If we win absolutely nothing next season but finish 2nd again, the conversation next season, it will be intriguing to see, because it'll be intriguing to see what happened over the course of that campaign. I'm really hoping that we pick up something. I think we need to. This team absolutely needs to as well. Benim says, Ferdi Kaliolu from Fenerbahce was followed and liked by Arsenal players. Napoli wants Dortmund. Napoli wants Dortmund. I don't know who you mean, Napoli wants Dortmund. He's a joker football player. He's a Premier League football player. He can run for 90 minutes. Kaliolu, of course, the interest of Arsenal, as I've discussed with you, it's not as significant as being claimed at the moment. It's not to say that there is an interest, but it's not as progressive as it seems that is being reported right now. So Nicholas says, only watching sport for trophies sounds like a miserable existence. I had an amazing time watching this squad this season, and still the 3rd youngest side in the league. The future is bright and I'm happy about it. Well summed up, Nicholas. Gary says, Tom, are we in danger of ending up with the same problems with the squad, that we are looking to offload a number of players and looking to add roughly the same amount of players? Do we need bigger squads? I don't think we do. No, I don't think it's about a bigger squad, Gary, at all. I think if you look at the Arsenal first team, right, I think we can all agree our best team, if everybody is fit right now, is Raya, if we sign him permanently, Ben White, Saliba, Gabriel, Tomiyasu. I'm not putting Timber in there at the moment because we've not seen enough of him. So I'd say that's our best back 5 with the goalkeeper. Rice and Partey and Ødegaard as our midfield 3, and then Saka, Havertz, and I tell you what, it's a toss-up between Trossard and Martinelli at the moment. I'd lean into Trossard right now. But, so that's your 11. On top of that 11, I'd say that competitively, you've got at the moment Ramsdale, arguably, but I think that will change. You've got Martinelli, as we discussed. You've got Gabriel Jesus as well, who adds plenty of quality to the forward line. You've got Jorginho in midfield. And I think the thing is, we need to swap out players like Nketiah. We need to swap out Nelson. There's an argument that Zinchenko should potentially go. Smith Rowe, Fabio Vieira. I think Kivior adds good depth. I think it'd be unfair to not list him in the options of competitive options, considering he started so many games for us in the second half of the season at left back. Started at Manchester City, don't forget, in our clean sheet there. So I think it'd be unfair not to put him in there. You've got Timber coming in to the team next season, which is going to be really, really important. So no, I don't think that we're adding the same amount of players. I think that we're adding three. I would add three absolute bangers to the squad. That's what we need to be looking at. Three really good competitive players. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be starters straight away, because our quality in our starting 11 is so good that even signing a banger doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to start for us, because that's how good our team is now. That you can sign a brilliant player and it still doesn't mean that they're going to start for us, because that's how good our starting 11 is. So you could sign a Benjamin Seska, who I think would be a banger of a signing personally, doesn't necessarily start, but adds so much more quality to the forward line than we've got already in the squad, and so much more potential for the future. You can add a midfielder like a Bruno Guimaraes to replace Partey. He's the only real starter in the team at the moment that you look at and go, he could be being replaced this summer. It's the midfield, that extra midfield. And that's why it's the most important signing that we can make this summer as a midfielder, because it's the only position in the starting 11 that I can see as replacing a starting player. Havertz, I don't see being replaced, because I don't see Isak being signed. And I don't see out there a striker that I would be starting ahead of Havertz that we could sign. Isak is the only one. I wouldn't start Osimhen ahead of him. I wouldn't start Tony ahead of him. I wouldn't start Sesko ahead of him. I wouldn't start Jimenez ahead of him. I wouldn't start Gyökeres ahead of him at the moment. Havertz has not done anywhere near enough to have lost that place. The only player that I'd be starting ahead of Havertz in Arsenal starting 11 at the start of next season is Isak. Is the only player that I would. The others I wouldn't. So Partey is the only one in this team at the moment that we're looking at potentially replacing. Of course, the left back position could be replaced with Timber, that we've already signed. If we sign a left-sided defender, I think it'll be one for depth, like a Yoel Hato, for instance. I saw that AFTV graphic who put Hato at left centre-back. That's ludicrous. I mean, how disrespectful to Gabriel Magalhaes was that graphic? Absolutely ridiculous. But Hato would come in potentially again as a young, youth, depth, quality option that we've got as well. So I don't think there's any danger, no. I think, Gary, that we need to add three quality players this summer, and then maybe a fourth and fifth depth option as well. Soph says the snobbery towards the cups is strange. I don't think I'm being snobbish, Soph. That's a bit harsh. I don't think I'm being snobbish at all. I think I understand that, and I've done this very sharp in talking about the FA Cup is a major trophy and deserves respect, deserves absolutely all of the plaudits. And Man United deserve plaudits for winning it. But I don't think that you can justify Arsenal's season if we'd have had what Man United had. I don't think you can justify Arteta staying. So yeah, let me know. Name names, Sophie says the chat is. Who's being snobbish to the FA Cup? What type of comments are there that are being snobbish? David says comparing a title charge with an FA Cup win is disingenuous. The level of consistency required to even be in a title challenge is something only 3 teams have done in 5 years. Twitter has skewed the analysis. I wouldn't describe that as snobbish. I think there's a lot of credit in that comment. I think that it is disingenuous to say that a title charge and winning the FA Cup are incomparable, and that winning the FA Cup completely negates the idea that a team competed for the title all the way up until the final day of the season. I think it would be disingenuous to try and separate those two significantly so. The trophy gives you something tangible. This trophy gives you something, solid that you can hold, you can point to. I get that. But only the Premier League title and only the Champions League stand as what's the word? Undebatable is not a word. Inarguable. That's the word I'm looking for. Only the Premier League and Champions League stand as inarguable titles, which any other season, any other combination is not suddenly a debate, So if a team finishes second, any team that wins the Champions League or Premier League title has had a better season than that team that finished second. But any team that wins the League Cup or the FA Cup, there is a debate to be had about whether Arsenal have had a better season by finishing second to Manchester City by just 2 points. And that's the difference, I think, between those. I don't think that's snobbish. I don't think that degrades those trophies necessarily. I just think that's where those trophies stand right now. I think that's just where the FA Cup is. The League Cup, maybe I am a bit snobbish about the League Cup. I'll hold my hands up and say maybe I can be a bit snobby about the League Cup, because I honestly lack a real appreciation for that competition. I find it a detraction. I find it a distraction. I find it to have been denigrated as a cup competition for many, many years. And that's because of how it's viewed. That's because of what the authorities, I think, that run it have done to it, with the sponsorships, with the reward that you get for winning it, with the two-legged semi-final. All of these things, sadly, I think have absolutely denigrated that competition. The FA Cup, though, stands without a doubt as a major trophy with zero debate there. But the only debate that exists with the FA Cup is how it impacts the view of a season if you've had a poor campaign. When Arteta won it within 6 months, the context was Arteta had been here 6 months and somehow managed to cobble together an FA Cup win with a fractured group of players. Ten Hag has had hundreds of millions on this team and 2 full seasons now, and finished 8th in the Premier League. Yes, he's had significant injuries, but there's still a debate to be had about whether or not he should stay. Where there's no debate about Arteta and whether he should stay. I think, people like our good friend Dan Potts, who has always been very critical of Arteta, is sitting there with me on show saying that Arteta deserves to stay for next season. Potts has been one of his biggest scrutinizers, but I don't think he thinks there's little debate about whether he deserves to stay for next season, because he absolutely does deserve to stay. Whereas if you look at Ten Hag, there is far more of a debate about whether or not Ten Hag should stay at Manchester United. Loga says short-term reactionary sacking of managers rarely makes teams better. It's always a risk. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There are arguments. Of course, Chelsea, you could argue, have had plenty of success by sacking managers. Manchester United have not. So there's the difference between those two. Anna Simos says this conversation revolves around the frustration and how much the good work Arsenal have been doing hasn't resulted in tangible success yet, and seemingly having one of our rivals lucking out in the cup competitions. Is it luck that won Man United the FA Cup this season? They beat Liverpool and they beat City. I wouldn't describe that as luck. Yes, there was some fortune in the semi against Coventry, but I wouldn't describe it as luck that they won the FA Cup this season. I think that they deserve to win the FA Cup this season. The season before, when they won the League Cup, their run was a joke, but I can't take away anything from this FA Cup win. Hybrid says, answer, this team hasn't won anything together. We are talking about this team. I'm assuming that we're talking about after our FA Cup when we've signed players. And, there is no debate about that point. It's just fact. We haven't won anything yet. But what we can say is that this team, without question, is looking destined to. I don't think there's much debate about that. And as I said, if you were to say who is your favourite between Man United and Arsenal to win a Premier League title next season, I don't think there's any question there whatsoever. So have a quick check on our poll, shall we? If Arsenal had gone from 2nd to 8th but picked up the FA Cup, could you justify keeping Arteta on? 71% of you say no. 29%, who I assume probably are arguing that more context would be needed, say yes. Northern Gunner says, you say you'd change our seasons for cities, but would you? What about all of the allegations that they're facing? I wouldn't necessarily change it. I think I was more referencing just the trophy. Of course, if you want to bring the context of the allegations and the asterisks and things like this, that changes the conversation absolutely. But I think I was more saying I would have rather picked up the Premier League than finished 2nd. Salahuddin says, I don't care if they won the FA Cup. Someone can analyse that we lucked it out to win our 14th FA Cup. There's always arguments for everything. And says, times have changed indeed. We are more interested in sacking managers at any opportunity than keeping them on if they have started a meaningful project. This is in reference to that second poll. Sophie says, I feel worse this weekend than I did last weekend. Oh, of course. Walking away with nothing after being so good is painful. Seeing United and their fans celebrate was sickening. And that's football. We don't like seeing our rivals celebrate. There was part of me, I think, that actually wanted United to win more than City yesterday, because of a number of reasons. One, because I'm so sick of Man City winning everything. I want to see cracks in the armour. I want to see that they are not invincible. I want to see that they're not infallible. I wanted to see Chelsea finish in the Conference League. My hatred towards Chelsea and as an Arsenal fan is obviously greater than that of my hatred towards Manchester United. I look at Man United, who finished 8th, as a nothing threat. I don't see this FA Cup victory as taking them anywhere. And the evidence of that is the fact that their managerial situation remains incredibly uncertain, despite the fact that they've just beaten Man City to win it. So I don't think so. I think the inevitability was one of those two teams was going to win it. So you're always going to feel worse after seeing somebody else win it. But I think there was part of me that wanted to see City lose that trophy. There really was. And I think that's because Arsenal are in a different league to Manchester United now. Arsenal are here, Man United are here. And ultimately, that makes me feel very differently about a team like City. We can take all the banter in the world. And the fact that Arsenal are taking plenty of slack and stick and not slack, Arsenal would take flack, that's the word. The fact Arsenal were taking so much flack yesterday shows you how relevant we are. It shows you how much we have rattled everybody by the fact that Arsenal, I think, were probably trending for many yesterday as well. So that shows you the difference between the teams. That shows you the difference between where Arsenal are and where Manchester United are as clubs. So I'd much rather be in my shoes right now than the Manchester United fan shoes. That is for sure. Did they get to celebrate a trophy? Sure, they'll enjoy that. But I have absolutely zero doubt in my mind that Arsenal are on a better pathway to winning bigger and bigger things than Manchester United will. Rob says, me too. I didn't want Man City getting another double. Also seeing Man United more fractured by this win and hopefully Ten Hag potentially staying as well. I mean, there's benefits to either, I think, now. I think it creates more doubt. It creates more debate. It creates more uncertainty. It creates more insecurity. Ironically, winning this as well. Luke says, all right, enough of the Man United bashing. I can't help it, mate. It's just part and parcel of our DNA. I'm sorry for that. We've given you plenty of respect, to be fair, Luke, for winning that FA Cup. You can't have it all your own way. Amira says, wasn't Emery, for lack of a better word, ridiculed for just being a cup manager? Does that mean that we should have kept him if it meant a greater chance of silverware, regardless of league position? By some, for sure. For me, Unai Emery was never the right man for this job. I've said this a number of times. I think he gets given far too much protection by a certain element of our fan base that don't give Wenger or Arteta the same level of kind of protection. The whole Emery was never backed is a load of bollocks. The whole Emery didn't get what he wanted. It doesn't matter. Arteta didn't necessarily get what he wanted. Arteta wanted a load of players that he didn't get. You could go through the likes of Lisandro Martinez. You could go to Rafinha. You can go to all these players that we wanted, that we ultimately didn't get. He wanted Dusan Vlahovic. He wanted loads of players that Arteta didn't get. He got given Willian because we couldn't afford to bring in a forward that summer. It's the only reason we signed Willian, by the way, for those that are unaware, is because Arsenal didn't have the money to go and sign a forward player. So when they were offered to sign Willian on a free, it was financially the only forward that we could bring in during that period. And he took it because it was better than nothing. Arteta wasn't necessarily gifted anything. Arteta wasn't backed necessarily in the same way that other managers have been backed, because we've missed out on, unfortunately, a lot of players that he wanted to sign. He wanted Mason Mount at the start of last summer, believe it or not. Kai Havertz was not the number one choice. Mason Mount was the number one choice, and Kai Havertz was a player that they saw as an opportunity after Manchester United were the preferred destination of Mason Mount. I think there are other players that I'm forgetting about. Emi Buendia, remember that guy? And it's because these players haven't necessarily always gone on to good things. Rafinha, I think, has been relatively impressive at Barcelona. I think Lisandro Martinez has shown to be a very good defender at Manchester United. But this argument that Emery wasn't backed, and Arteta has been, is such a misrepresentation of the facts. It's a huge misrepresentation. Neither of those managers necessarily got what they wanted. But Arteta progressed Arsenal. Unai Emery didn't. Unai Emery has gone to clubs like Sevilla and Villarreal and Aston Villa, clubs where it suits him. Those clubs suit his style as a coach. It suits his level. We always talk about certain players doing well at certain teams because they found their level. Unai Emery found his level with Villarreal, with Sevilla, and with Aston Villa. But when he went to PSG, he failed. And when he went to Arsenal, he failed. Because at those clubs, at those elite clubs, he is not a successful coach. But at the clubs like Aston Villa, where he can get his teeth sunk into those teams and he can be, the key focus there and he can do good things, they suit him. They suit him as a manager. And he's a very good coach. He's just not a coach for me that he's ever going to be good enough to manage at the elite level of Arsenal's, of PSG's, of these clubs. And he will always have his ways. He's, as I say, because he's a good coach. So he's always going to find ways to beat certain coaches. That's why he beat Pep Guardiola this season. That's why he beat us twice this season, because some teams just play better against some other teams. Some tactics, some philosophies just work against some teams more than others. And Arsenal have struggled against Aston Villa, and we have to find a way next season of beating them. We have to. Arteta has got to find a way to work out Unai Emery, because he hasn't so far. He's got one win against him at Villa last season. It took a very late goal to win that game. Did we beat them at home that season? I think we might have done. Yes, we did, because we had that crazy close 2-1, wasn't it? But we beat them twice last season. But this season they beat us twice. And we have to find a way to beat them. Some managers just beat some coaches sometimes, you know? So he's a good coach, but he's not good enough. And I think he proved that at PSG, and he proved that at Arsenal. That he wasn't good enough for those types of clubs. He is good enough for the Sevillas, the Aston Villas, and for the Villarreals of this world. And that's why he does well at those clubs, but doesn't necessarily do as well at the other clubs when he has to take that next leap, that next step to that next elite level. But the argument that he wasn't backed and that Arteta has been is a complete misrepresentation of the facts, as I've explained. BX Gunner says, the agenda pushers don't like Arteta, whether from him being a player, I don't know, but it seems that it's always personal when attacking him. It's pathetic. Absolutely, you're right. Paul says, Emery thrives at middling teams and gets them closer to the big teams. Arsenal and PSG were too big for him. Soph says, though, that Emery following Wenger was always going to be a tough ask. He inherited a mess first. He made the mess worse, Soph. I don't think he necessarily inherited a mess when Arsene Wenger left. I think he inherited an opportunity, which sadly, he was the wrong coach. He made the situation worse. We went backwards under Unai Emery, and Arteta had to pick up the pieces and, restructure the entire thing. So, sadly, we went backwards. Ramba says, hello, I disagree with your opinion of the backing of the two managers. And then full stop. I don't really see what the explanation is, Ramba, but I'd happily hear what you mean. Anna Seymour says, remember the Newcastle game and the Villa game with the goal being taken off us could have changed our season. Sometimes that's life, and Arsenal fans are meant to suffer. Those games obviously could have gone very differently. Arsenal deserved a penalty at Aston Villa as well. It's worth pointing out. And we never deserved to lose that Newcastle game. That was a joke. John says, Emery looks like Beavis from Beavis. Oh, Beavis and Beavis. I've never watched that program, but I'm aware of what it is. It's an unfortunate lookalike, if that's true. Joette says, I will never understand how Arsenal didn't win a trophy. They were the best team in the Premier League. It is mad. More goals than any other team. Other than City, of course, and less goals conceded than any other side. It's mad. Magambo says, yes, and Arteta has managed only us. So stop disrespecting manager with winning credential. Magambo is never, ever going to see my side, which is fine. We've put facts towards Magambo time and time again, but sadly has never been able to take it in. Sophie says, what? Wenger is to blame for the demise of Arsenal. Holy crap. This is a podcast episode. Sophie, you're more than welcome to jump on the show. I'm happy. I've got 10 more minutes to discuss with you if you like. But I don't think he left Arsenal in as much of a mess as Unai Emery left Arsenal in as much of a mess. I just don't. I don't think Arsenal were in as much of a mess when Wenger left as they were when Unai Emery left. The mess was worse then. There was an opportunity after Wenger left to change things, and we didn't. I do think that the credit I will give to Emery is, unfortunately, he didn't have necessarily the people at Arsenal. The Raul Sanyehes of this world were here, obviously, so I didn't think that helped him. But he didn't help himself. And sadly, we tactically were so dull and horrible to witness and watch. And, we went on that weird run of being unbeaten for like 22 games. And after that, it gave us kind of a bit of a false dawn. And then sadly, it's gone backwards. It went backwards since that point. Without a doubt, I wanted him to succeed. I never, ever wanted Unai Emery to fail. I wanted him to continue to thrive and to show that he could do what he couldn't do at PSG. I wanted him to prove all of his doubters wrong from his time at PSG, because I feel like, even though he didn't step up to that level and he failed there, it was always never going to be the right club, PSG, for Unai Emery. It was the worst. It was the worst of that bunch of clubs he could have gone to. Arsenal was an amazing opportunity, and sadly, he couldn't rise to it. As many managers have gone to certain clubs and have been unable to do. So Pochettino, you could argue, maybe is another one of those as well. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, I think Poch and Emery are probably in the same bracket of coaches. I'd probably put them in that same bracket, whereas I see Arteta for me as a better coach than those. And you will point to the trophies that Emery has won, but he's been a manager a lot longer, of course, so he's had much more time to win those. I have no doubt in my mind that Arteta will go on to win plenty. Anyway, let us know your thoughts on anything we've discussed today. Please do drop a like on the video, of course, and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning, bright and early, to give you all the latest Arsenal news from a day where there is playoffs to discuss. Southampton, best of luck to you, and to Leeds, of course, and any fans going to Wembley. I hope you have an amazing day. My lenience is towards Southampton, and that is purely selfish and because of friends. But other than that, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Please do drop a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on. And I'll be back with you, as I say, tomorrow. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.